Okay, so welcome everybody. This is a discussion of some of the Pathwork lectures that are compiled in a book called The Pathwork of Self Transformation, that sort of is a collection of some of the favorite lectures of the 258 that the Pathwork Guide channeled through Eva Pierrakos, and all of these lectures are available online uh, at pathwork.org. So, sorry, I'm trying to get back. I didn't realize I had this very. There we go. Okay, so yeah, and so we've been going through this book, and this is chapter 15. And it's a very interesting lecture called The Connection Between the Ego and the Universal Power. And so there's a kind of editorial comment at the beginning of the lecture that says, energy and consciousness manifest as the undivided power of the universe. This power is the creative life principle residing within all of us. However, human beings often lose conscious contact with this creative divine power and trust the limited ego more than the higher self within. What is the fear behind this separation? How can we detect our shame of what is best in us? And how can we give over to the universal power within? So, greetings, my dearest friends. May this lecture give you renewed insight and strength so that your attempts to find yourself, who you are, where you belong, and how to fulfill yourself become a little easier. May you find a new shaft of light through these words by truly opening up to new aspects of ideas you have perhaps heard before, but that have not as yet become personally experienced truth for you. So the universal life principle and the forgetful ego. The meaningfulness and fulfillment of one's life depend in the last analysis entirely on the relationship between your ego and the universal life principle, the real self, as we also call it. If this relationship is balanced, everything falls into place. The universal life principle is life itself. It is eternal consciousness in its deepest and highest sense, eternal movement and pleasure supreme. Since it is life, it cannot die. It is the essence of all that breathes, moves, vibrates. And I think there's a typo here, so I don't quite understand this sentence. It says, it blows all, for it constantly creates and perpetuates itself, because it cannot be untrue to its own nature. So, not quite sure what that word is supposed to be, but I don't think it's blows. But the rest of the sentence makes sense, like that it's, it has to be, one with its own nature, and so it is constantly creating and perpetuating itself. And every individual consciousness is universal consciousness, not just a part of it. For a part implies only a little. But wherever consciousness exists, it is the original consciousness. This original consciousness or creative life principle takes various forms. When in the process of individualization, an entity passes the point of remembering its connection with its origin, a disconnection occurs. The particular consciousness continues to exist and to contain the universal consciousness, but it becomes oblivious to its own nature, its laws, and its potentials. This, in short, is the state of human consciousness as a whole. The part that has forgotten its connection to the life principle we call the separate ego. When you begin to become aware of the life principle, you discover that it has always been there, but you have not noticed it because you were under the illusion of existing separately. It is therefore not entirely accurate to state that the universal consciousness manifests. It would be more correct to say that you begin to notice it. You may notice the life principle's ever-present power as autonomous consciousness or as energy. The separated ego personality possesses both, but the ego intelligence is inferior by far to the universal intelligence, whether or not you can recognize it and put it to use. The same applies to the energy. Consciousness and energy are not separate aspects of universal life. They are one. So that's a big mouthful. So let's take a breath and sort of open to any, questions or discussion of anything so far. Are you following this? Should we back up? And so in a sense, I think, one way of looking at this lecture is the guide is introducing us to an understanding of our higher self. And, I can remember when I first started Pathwork, it was like, it felt like it was a very remote, far away thing, that was, different than me somehow or beyond me somehow that, I was trying to access. And so, I didn't get a sense of, how it could be, activated or utilized or, even in meditation for guidance, it didn't seem to work for me. So, there's this kind of way that I think again, the guide says, we have to like conceive of something before we can sort of manifest it or bring it into, you know, consciousness. And so in this way, I think it's a lecture that's beginning to help us sort of understand, like who is and what is this aspect of our nature that, we kind of lost connection with, is what he's saying in this lecture, right? It's like we are at this stage in our development where we're individuating. And so there's a way that we are, so focused on sort of becoming and discovering who we are, or, and it's kind of like in our separate state of individual selfness that we're trying to, figure that out. And it's kind of like a preliminary stage into becoming a part of a cooperative, community or something like that. We need to know who we are. We need to know our gifts. We need to know our strengths. We need to know our weaknesses. And yet, it's like it is sort of self-absorbed and focused only in this sense of a separate self. And so that's kind of where we're having a struggle to, sort of bridge in our consciousness right now, this more collective and larger, reality of the life force in all of life everywhere, not just certain people and certain races and nationalities or certain, just humans or, like that it's in everything. And yet, there is a way that if we really understand, that energy and consciousness are, are part of this larger, essentially you would say that's what is God, right? It's another way of, not making God into a personality so much as a, an energy and consciousness, the principles of these things. So does that make sense? Any questions?
Yeah, it's almost like all those identities are limited. And as soon as you open that bigger consciousness, universal consciousness, it's almost like it can get connected to open space.
Right. And it's kind of like, how can we activate that, or how can we, connect to that? Is part of what this lecture is saying. And like we have fear about that in a way. And so, he talks about, how we can, begin to trust in our spontaneous, you know like sort of unconstructed and planned behaviors, which is where, it comes from. Like we have to kind of access something deeper than just our, rational thought processes or our, projections of our past into the future or our strategizing or our, and kind of deepen into the life force itself, this universal principle, which is what, gives life. Sort of the structures of the mind try to control life, right? And this deeper aliveness and consciousness of life, it needs our permission in some way to move through us. So,
And you know what? It does appear that people who seem to be more connected to that universal consciousness naturally seem to have more energy,
uh-huh.
you know? They get more done,
Yeah,
it seems.
yeah, yeah. And I think, I mean, it almost does feel like the wind beneath your wings, it's kind of like, or you're not using your own individual ego consciousness, it's like the universal life force working through you,
Yeah,
right? And so it's like you're plugged in to something bigger that's animating and keeping, and it feeds you as well as, so it doesn't have that usual effective sort of the sense of, oh, if I give, it's depleting me,
right,
it's
right,
so. And it also, like, is this positive sort of yes current flow that I think it like does. It's like a lift of lightness, of air, of breath, of, you know positive spirits, joy, that kind of thing. And when we're in touch with, even in the midst of difficulties and suffering or challenging, sometimes, there's beauty always present. There's, you know amazing things to witness. And, like, I think a part of what we're here for is just to experience all of this, right?
Yeah, and it's almost to me like whatever this, not to downplay it, but maybe in some way the lots of pain that we experience there. I mean, I'm sure majority of that pain is maybe something that is hurting more of a pattern in us of this identity that we used to, rather than just a bigger kind of consciousness.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Part of individualization is kind of like this third chakra kind of sense of esteem and, and shame and pride and, like all of these kinds of things that, are sort of, it makes things that happen to us be taken very personally.
Yeah.
And, part of, I think, connecting to the universal consciousness and the life force and everything allows you also to, not, like take things quite so personally, right? It's like, um, and it kind of gives us a bigger perspective, and we become one with, everything else that also suffers or, has challenges, or, we don't see ourselves as less than other people, or comparing ourselves in a negative or, envious, jealous kind of way, because we kind of recognize that, we're all mixed bags. And, like I got my my mixed bag of stuff, but, I think I'd rather have, the devil I know than the devil, like we're none of us, really any better than anyone else. We really are all equal in some basic way. And our job is just to make the most out of what we are, both our limitations and our, capacities, our things that we love, things we want to serve, and, are, activating some, good in the world through our own, caring in some way, heart-centered thing. And I think our heart is more sort of connected to that energy consciousness. Uh, it's like, again, it's an embodied thing. It's when we just make it intellectual or, try to talk about it, it's like, I mean, we kind of can maybe get an idea of it, but it's like we have to literally experience, the energy in our own life force. So even right now, if you just go inside and close your eyes a minute and just, measure, like, okay, so, sometimes I'm full and sometimes I'm more depleted and sometimes I'm lifted and sometimes I'm, more in gravity or heavier or whatever. So just kind of take a reading, of like, how is your energy consciousness in sort of its default mode, baseline network thing right now, and, and just kind of feel really the power, even if you're exhausted or tired or limited in some way, like if you kind of notice, it's like it may seem subtle or, not so strong, but it's like it's pretty powerful if you tune into sort of the throb, the hum, the vibration, the, you know, uh, experience of your own life force. And as you're, just experiencing the energy, see, like it's like it's an experience and it contains consciousness, it contains awareness and understanding, and your consciousness is also connected, and experiencing the energy that's within you. So I'm going to continue reading. So it says, backing up a little, when you begin to become aware of the life principle, you discover that it has always been there, but you haven't noticed it because you were under the illusion of existing separately. So we kind of like it was our own energy, our own efforts, our own will, our own kind of separated self-activity. So it's therefore, not entirely accurate to state that the universal consciousness manifests. It would be more correct to say that you begin to notice it. So first we don't notice it, and then we begin to have this awareness. You may notice the life principle's ever-present power as autonomous consciousness or as energy. And, so like as autonomous consciousness, I suspect that he means there, like, guidance, intelligence, wisdom coming in some way, like, guiding us. And as energy, it could also be impulse or, like choice, active, you know, choosing in some way. So the separated ego personality possesses both energy and consciousness, but the ego intelligence is inferior by far to the universal intelligence, whether or not you can recognize it and put it to use. And the same applies to the energy. Consciousness and energy are not separate aspects of universal life. They are one. And I don't know if that helps you, but for me, like when I think of this, feel this energy and then realize, it's like everything, in the universe that's, exists consists of this energy and some form of consciousness, right? That is the essential nature of consciousness. That is, the one consciousness. And then everything together collectively, is sort of that one consciousness as well as, maybe even beyond it. But, it's kind of like there's this fabric of the universe of space-time. I think Einstein says, I put my faith in the curvature of space-time. And in some ways, it's like a weaving of this energy consciousness that, we're all connected with. And it's a part of the challenge for us right now because, our ecology tells us, our science tells us, that we are all connected, but we still don't feel it. And So it's just a kind of concept. So, this is, I think, a part of our challenge right now is to, again, bring our sense of education out of the mental realm where it's kind of like limited in that space to, understanding that we need to, like experience our inner connection directly. And maybe some of that is, remembering that the air we breathe comes from the trees or whatever, I mean, I'm not saying that's not important, but it needs to be more visceral. I think we need to feel directly our kinship, our, what befalls, everything else befalls us. And sort of really wanting to give unto others, do unto others as we would want done to ourselves. And it's a kind of, remember, Matthew Fox had this thing on original blessing where he talked about like God's like essential nature as divine host, right? And this hosting and guesting that like we are invited guests to God's divine hosting. And we can find our gratitude and our receptive channel, right? And part of, I think, the deal is that we need to really become receptive, and that means we have to get rid of our lack of deserving and all of that, and know that we are one with this energy, and the best thing, what it wants for us, what we need, is to unite with this and feel the connection, the force of the bonding of love, right? That it's energy, it's consciousness, but the felt sense of it is to be included, to be part of, to be one with, to be unified, to be not a stepchild but a child, right? A belonging. And I think when we can begin to recognize sort of this deeper level, where it's not just principle, but person, it's conscious, it's like the divine intelligence knows us and cares for us. And we might think, oh, that's kind of regressing back to the old, biblical God, the Father, who loves us and approves of us or doesn't. But I think it's something that we can't just get rid of. And, we don't want to just have a strict, like critical father. I don't think that's reality either. So I think it's useful to kind of imagine what this consciousness and energy are, really feel like. So let's continue and see where else the lecture goes. One of the universal life principles' basic characteristics, whether expressed as autonomous consciousness or as energy, is that it is spontaneous. It cannot possibly reveal itself through a laborious process or a cramped, over-concentrated state. Its manifestation is always an indirect result of effort. Effort needs to be expended for the sake of seeing the truth about oneself, of giving up a specific illusion, of overcoming a barrier to wanting to be constructive rather than destructive, and not for an as yet theoretical process called self-realization that promises to feel good. So, we want to take it out of the airy-fairy and, look at it in the terms of these, most of the work is, removing the resistances. Each step towards seeing the truth in the self with a genuine desire for constructive participation in the creative process of life frees the self. So like every time we face and recognize something, like we have to be careful because sometimes we have this voice inside of us that automatically when we say something, see something, in ourself, it judges us, it rejects us, it, criticizes us. So this kind of keeps us stuck and not wanting to see, right? And then we don't recognize, like, when we do really see this, it really is, a step that frees ourselves. And so this is how the spontaneous processes begin. We have to kind of free up all of our contractions, our shames, our defenses, right? Because all of those things block the spontaneous movement of the life force within us, all of the programs, all of the self-doubts, all of that stuff. And so to activate, this higher self, this divine aspect of our own being, mostly it is this kind of cleansing, purification, removal of all of the ways that we're frozen, stuck, like fearful, and contracted and can't relax into this spontaneity, into this present moment, into, we're bored or we want to create something, like we can't just be here and reap the riches and the amazing, show of life that's right here. It's like we're hungry for something. It's like we're seeking, and it gets in the way of our really finding. So when we can see the truth with a genuine desire for constructive participation in the creative process of life, this frees the self. This is how the spontaneous processes begin. They are never consciously volitional. Like, you can't make us ourselves be spontaneous, right? It's oxymoron. The more you fear the unknown, the letting go, the involuntary processes in your body, the less you can experience the spontaneous life principle in the self. The life principle may manifest as previously unimaginable wisdom in solving one's personal problems or in cultivating one's creative talents. It can become a new, vibrant way of experiencing life, giving a new flavor to all one is doing and seeing. The life principle is always safe, always holds out justified hope that will never be disappointed. There is never any fear in this new life experience. It cannot be pushed and forced. It comes about exactly to the degree that you no longer fear the involuntary processes, those inner mechanisms that are not under the direct control of the ego. So does anybody have some example of what's your sense of what he's talking about, these involuntary processes that we're sort of constantly holding against, right? This is where I think in our body we unconsciously, hold up, hold back, hold in, hold out, hold on, hold together, hold in all of these kind of contractive, constrictive ways, the natural flow of the life force. So does somebody want to share any example that might come to mind?
I don't know. Sometimes it just maybe just bring in awareness and know whatever feels like expansion, like your soul expansion, not just your something that will benefit you in any other tangible materialistic way, even if it's against of what people think.
Uh-huh. Yeah, sort of like our natural attractions that, sometimes even put us out of connection with, our parents or other authorities and stuff like that. But some kind of sense of interest or of wanting to pursue,
Yeah, and it's usually scary. It's scary to the ego, and you feel scared.
Mm-hmm.
But you somehow know intuitively that there's something behind it, like freedom behind this,
Right.
that you can't really justify truly because there's no, in that universal power, universal truth, there's no really nothing you can explain or put in words really. It's almost like it's just experience of this freedom and Yeah, I don't know. I'm just thinking on my life choices and I don't know, just following, maybe started following intuition and and um go and do things against the fear would be
Yeah.
first steps towards it.
Yeah. And in some ways we're doing, I mean, like I think, like whatever we sometimes, we don't do it completely wholeheartedly, or there's, the conflict inside, which one part of us wants to pour ourselves into that, thing that we love in life, or, want to give to or whatever, and enjoy doing, and then somehow, you know practicality, or all of these other considerations might come in to you know hold us back. And it's not like we don't have to we have to ignore all of the voices. Maybe some of them hold a piece of truth that we need to do some problem solving around, or something like that. But it's like, yeah, we want to, it's kind of like, Joseph Campbell, follow your bliss, is part of this. Now, other parts of it, I think, are like when we can be just totally present to a situation or a circumstance. And of course, whenever we're triggered, or, something triggers our defenses, we're not really fully present. We're kind of in the past, we're in a trauma trance with it. But when we can sort of like just be in this observing place, and, like witnessing, like the moment, especially maybe like, let's say, we're witnessing a conflict, or aware that there's conflict that's arising between us and somebody else, we could go into our defense, or our argument, or our positionality, or we could just get really present to, oh, this is happening now, and kind of open to this universal energy and consciousness, right? To inspire us, kind of like the ego gets humble and says, like, I don't know what's needed here, like, and, so I'm kind of just waiting and see what impulse comes through me, see what comes to mind to speak out of the blue that, I hadn't planned, or I'm not saying in reaction to what the other person is saying. And so I think it manifests spontaneously when we can get fully, fully present to the now.
Mhm.
Franco, if you're trying to talk, I think you're muted. I'm not hearing you.
Okay, okay. Um, I keep thinking about self-will in this equation. It's like letting go of the self-will, the need to control. Um, more you can let go of that need to control, the more in the present you can be.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's that, like you said, it's the will issue, and this kind of thing of surrendering and trusting, again, that it's what is arising, whether it's pleasant or unpleasant, is this universal life force, and it's divine in whatever it's bringing. And if we can kind of like trust that, like it may not be, it may be uncomfortable in the moment, or, may not be what we had pictured or planned, but, as we can, like just breathe, be with it, accept it, and that doesn't mean that we don't decide to do something about it, that maybe comes to us. But the first step is to sit back and just really open to allowing ourselves to be with it as it is, and to kind of like almost biblically know the moment that way, like to embrace it that fully and experience what's there. And it's where we're, I guess, in fear, or like why do we want to control, right? Like what's we fear, like something bad might happen to us. But this is almost kind of like where, well, this universe, this universal life force, this whole thing is a benign force, is what the guide is saying here, right? And I think it's a loving force. That's my experience. It's like, so we have to kind of practice that and know that, and sometimes that means like leaping off of little cliffs, starting with the little ones and getting bigger as we go, to learn to, trust. And of course, in most of our life, we've come to situations where, we've had to take a risk, and how did that work out? You're still here, right? Some way it's okay. May not have worked out exactly how you felt, but you found your way. So, I think there is this.
We don't see it as benign. We don't feel the universe is benign.
Right?
We think that annihilation is just a misstep away.
Exactly. Exactly. And so, and again, it's saying that this universal consciousness is eternal, is life. There is no death, right? So this is also, showing us that this is an image, this is a false understanding of things. And there is a shaman's death, which is the surrender into, things that we thought we didn't want, or, wasn't part of the plan or whatever. But, when we can learn that and, find a way to accept the things as they are, like as God's will, right? If I used to kind of puzzle, what do they mean? What, like, God's will be done, or what is God's will? And I think it really must be God's will is the way things are. Now, sometimes that's a hard thing to swallow, right? But over and over, when I've said, okay, well, let me just look at it that way, and trust that there's some, some godness in this, cluster or whatever it is, like in this difficulty, in this mess, that it's somehow, a necessary evolutionary process, that takes us, not only ascending to the heights, but we have to kind of descend into the shadow and confront and face the, parts of us that are, you know, unconscious and negative still, or whatever. So, somehow, again, it's not the, 100 desire of the child consciousness, that is in duality and everything, but this greater acceptance that life has both pleasure and pain, good and bad, right and wrong, however you want to split the dice. And yet, when we see in hindsight, like, it seems all to be part of the good, part of the necessary, part of the, you know, journey of what it takes to get us where we're going.
Yeah, it's interesting just looking back on life, all the painful moments, just not really, it's almost like everything was beautiful, even
Yeah.
everything included,
Yeah.
sad and happy, and all of it was just kind of the same force, the same nature, and it's just all together beautiful. And it's just maybe just separating it and labeling it a certain way creates more separation and resistance to it.
Yeah.
Necessary.
Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah. To just, like, be able to look back and see, like, what we thought was the end of the world. What does that say? To you know, the end of the world to the caterpillar, to the master is a butterfly. It's
Yeah.
like, and there's also, that Brian Swimme statement about, like the swiftness of or the elegance of the hawk is dependent on the swiftness of the mouse. So we have to have our challenges, our good enemies, our, problems that we, hone ourselves with and establish our creative brilliance, by having something to, fence against, or whatever. So, okay, so let's go on further with the lecture. So, conflict between yearning for and fearing the real self. Humanity finds itself in a paradoxical position of deeply yearning for the fruits of these involuntary processes, yet fearing and battling them. See if you can even see, like, wouldn't it be great just to let go and flow into the, impulses and the life force and the, sleep when I feel sleepy and, do something when I, just, be spontaneous and yet feel, like also how you can't feel it, that wouldn't be safe. I couldn't do that. I have to control it. I have to make sure I'm on top of myself. I have to keep things in line. This conflict is terrible and tragic, and it can be resolved only when you let go of the fear. All psychological problems come in the final analysis from this much deeper existential conflict, far beyond those individual personal difficulties the child experiences that later cause inner problems and misconceptions. So this is kind of a layer underneath our childhood, level of dynamic. So all life moves towards resolving this basic conflict. Such resolution can only happen if first the individual neurotic conflicts are found and understood. So I guess that's pointing back to the childhood issues. And you need to learn to see and accept whatever is real and true in yourself, in others, and in life. Honesty must prevail to stop one's attempt to cheat life, no matter how subtly. All character defects have to be removed by fully acknowledging and objectively observing them without plunging into despair or denying them. This attitude in itself removes the defects infinitely more effectively than any other approach. Only then is one able to perceive the existential conflict between the ego and the universal consciousness. Misinterpretations of the universal life principle in religion. So it kind of digresses here and gives us a little bit of, an overview. And I think it's useful. He says the spontaneously manifesting universal consciousness has nothing to do with religious precepts of a removed deity or a life beyond this physical life. These are misinterpretations that occur when a person senses the universal life principle and gropingly tries to convey this experience to those whose ego is still in conflict with it. Such misinterpretations must alienate you from your immediate self and from your practical daily life. So when we, project a God outside and try to, live up to that or whatever, it alienates us. People wish to find a compromise between their yearning, which comes from the deep sense of the present possibilities available to them, and their fear. They have created it in every formalized religion that removes God from the self and from daily life, that splits human nature into the spiritual and the physical being. Thus, total fulfillment is perforce removed from the now into a life after death. All such views and approaches to life are nothing but a compromise between what one senses could exist and what one fears. So see if you can feel, that kind of basic split in you, like, all of that, this total fulfillment that is in the now, that is the connection with the universal life force and the sort of letting go and truly surrendering to it and letting it be, your guide, that which moves you and, feel maybe the fear of it. Like I often get, like laugh at myself because I've, wanted guidance, I wanted to hear guidance for all my life. And, like every time I try, no matter what system or what, thing, it doesn't really happen in the way that at least, my imagination is looking for it. And then I kind of like look at, okay, is there some reason behind that, a self-responsible reason? It's not like just God withholding from me or something like that. And I even believe it's probably the right thing for now. It's not something that's really a problem unless I want to make it that. But I do feel like I can recognize, that it probably comes from a part in me that wouldn't trust what I heard. right? That wouldn't, I mean, even when I sometimes do, pendulums or tarot cards or whatever, like I don't sort of, I'm not fully obedient to, kind of the perspective because, you know, I, I don't totally buy into it. And so I kind of feel like, well, the guides could, tell me everything, but they probably know better. They know I'm not going to listen anyway. So they just let me figure it out, stumbling around on my own. Which is the way that I want to learn. It is my choice. And at some level, it is my free will choice, So, and that feels, at least at this point in the game, right and safer. You know, and I feel like, there's no judgment against doing it that way, right? We have free will. We can do it that way if we want. It's as good a way as any way. So, we're back to the lecture. It's like, so we've created it in every formalized religion, this way that removes God from the self and from daily life. So this whole idea that that the universal consciousness is who we are and is active in all of our moments, is part of the way that religion kind of, it's like there's the mundane world and the spiritual world, right? And you have to be a certain way to enter in the spiritual world and all of that. So this splits human nature into spiritual and physical being. Thus, total fulfillment is perforce removed from the now into a life after death. All such views and approaches to life are nothing but a compromise between what one senses could exist and what one fears. This fear goes beyond the neurotic fears that stem from misconceptions and personally experienced traumas. What is this basic fear of letting go of the outer ego and letting the universal processes unfold and carry you? It is the misunderstanding that giving up the ego means giving up existence. See, in order to get a little better understanding for this problem, let's consider how the ego formed itself out of universal life. Individuation is an integral aspect of the universal life force. So it's a process that, the creative life is always moving, reaching out, expanding and contracting, finding new areas of experience and branching into new territories. It finds forever new ways to experience itself. As an individual consciousness separates itself further and further from its original source, it forgets its essence and becomes oblivious of its own principles and laws until it seems to be a totally separate entity. Individual existence is, in its present state, associated only with separate existence. So giving up the ego, what the ego wants, what the ego wants to control, must then appear to the individual as an annihilation of its unique personal existence. This is the current condition of human beings. You live under the illusion that life, the sense of I am, can be found only in your separate existence. This illusion has brought death into the human realm, for death is nothing but this illusion being carried to its final absurdity. It's an interesting statement, right? Can you see how, this separate existence sort of creates the state of death? I think again, we were talking about how the life force can infuse us, right? If we feel connected to something beyond us, but when we're isolated little selves, right? And it's all our own will, our own energy, our own effort, our own, uh, capacity to control, it makes us feel limited and tired and, like it's all too hard. And so we give up, we can't continue it, like the life force doesn't continue enlivening us and feeding us. we eventually run out and fall into death. The realization that the separate ego existence is an illusion constitutes an extremely important step in the evolution of humanity. Any work of self-actualization brings this issue into clear focus. As you look deeply at the immediately available truth of yourselves as individuals, you will find that you and the creative life principle are one. The more you look at yourself in truth and shed your illusions about yourself, the more you will realize that individual existence is not surrendered when the involuntary processes of the creative life principle are allowed to take over and integrate with the ego functions. So this is, I think, really the highest goal, right? And it is kind of like this shaman's death where we think, we're going to die, because we believe we're the separate. And then what happens is when this flows through us, it's like the greatest fulfillment and, joy that we could know. And we can feel immediately how it, is more effective in responding to whatever the is of the now is. And so we, learn to just be present and with that and following that.
Is it sort of the same thing that people experience taking like high doses of psychedelics, where they go into just feeling like they're dying?
I mean, yeah, there are some, I think it's part of just this, sort of, even in Pathwork, sometimes people feel like they die when they go into their deep, traumas or places of fear, and stuff like that. And yeah, I think it kind of like gets maybe expressed more literally sometimes in the, very high dose, journeys that people sometimes go to on retreats and stuff like that, where they're sort of intentionally seeking that experience. I think it's kind of like a vision quest where they want to, sort of face this kind of ego death in some way if they can. And so I don't know that everybody goes through that, or even if it's, necessary or needs the psychedelics. But, I think it's like the guide says, all of our little deaths, prepare us for the big death. And, some of the, ways that, where, we can't control what life brings us. And so we have to find our way through it, and through and out the other side. And all of that, both helps us, accept and learn to take the responsibility of accepting life as it is and working with it as it is. It's what God wants somehow. And we may not understand it, we may not like it, but, it is what is. And it's kind of like a little crazy to fight it so badly. But if your ego is like mine, it's like it can majorly get into resistance of what is. And even though I know that's kind of futile, like resistance is futile, my it still, I can feel the investment in the fear, in the resistance, in the energy that just can't. I think a lot of times the will interprets surrender as submission, and it kind of has to work through the duality of, submission versus, I win, I lose, and the ego death of losing, right, is a kind of, sometimes a way that we need, because the ego needs to humble itself or needs to, recognize its humanity or its, vulnerability or whatever like that. So it's not necessarily a bad thing at all. But we can also get stuck or lost in those, kind of wounding experiences. And so we really, it's kind of what pathwork is it's like, and helpers are like, they kind of function as psychopomps that kind of lead the soul through the underworld, right? You need sometimes some help going through the underworld. So he's saying, separate state operates dualistically. Okay, so let me back up. So it says, those who have begun to experience the immediacy of this greater life in a renewal of energy find paradoxically that the more they give, I don't even think I'm ended there. Let's see. The more you look at yourself in truth and shed your illusions about yourself, the more you will realize that the individual existence is not surrendered when the involuntary processes of the creative life principle are allowed to take over and integrate with the ego functions. I mean, we feel more alive, more joyous, more fully capable, So those who have begun to experience the immediacy of this greater life in a renewal of energy find paradoxically that the more they give of their energy, the more renewed energy they generate within. For that is the law of the universal life principle. The separated state operates dualistically. It seems logical that the more one gives, the less one has, and the more depleted one becomes. This comes from the illusion that the outer ego is all there is to individuality. The root of the fear is to let go of all tight ego defenses, is precisely this misconception. So I don't know if you can sense that, but can you sense that you are an individual beyond and outside of just, this ego construct or this, personality or this story that you have lived, can you sense your kind of inner essential nature and its own unique individuality? Maybe it's a certain love vibration that you recognize as yours, what you feel when you feel caring for or loving of something. Uh, again, and go ahead.
It's most of the time, I was just gonna say, it's when you're away from people is it's just because most of the time, like in a crowd with people, like I can't really find that connection yet, or just universal truth and love, because it's almost like everybody's stuck in their ego identity and just exchanging kind of this limited views on things, and it's almost like it just contraction. It's how I usually feel, contracted. But when away, um, I don't know, in nature, mostly you can see something bigger than just identity, just a um some things you share um with just everything around you.
Yeah. And I think it's because, like, in nature we're equal and we're just present and we don't have, like, like all of the associated, self-consciousness or trauma or, history with, suffering with other people, in some way. And so, like, we don't have, like, we're kind of regressed when we're around other people, and we're more, in touch with our child view of the world, uh, like a little more insecure. All these strangers, will they like me? Am I acceptable? Kind of thing. And we don't have our own inner connection with source. And until we can get that connection again to this universal life force, to this, consciousness, then, we, are not able to feel our firmness, feel, who we are, affirm that, and just be spontaneous and naturally who we are, without trying to manage ourselves and manipulate ourselves. So, it is this kind of spontaneity that happens, we can be ourselves in nature, because there's, nature doesn't judge us, right? In our experience with other humans is this whole realm of control and judgment. And so we have to sort of connect with our own true self. And once we know our real self, once we, can, let go into being who we are no matter what, and not kind of trying to control this. We don't have our true inner authority. And that's something that I think helps us step into a more mature way of being in the world, right? But for the most part, I think what you're saying is when we're around other people, we tend to regress. And so we're trying to establish sort of this inner center of giving and receiving, this inner, benign impulse of love that comes through us, this, as kind of the main channel, the main thing that we are channeling as well.
Yeah, because ultimately it's just, I don't know, it is the ultimate goal to be okay around people, while having this consciousness, like being connected to the universal consciousness, and just still be kind of okay around people that maybe haven't really felt this or experienced that all the way. Um, yeah, and it's definitely, you have to experience that more often and just be present, and then again present
Yeah.
again.
I mean, once you really get that, and kind of like connect with your own inner authority, it does, for the most part, expel the, any concerns around who this is coming in. Somebody's joining us. Hey, is that you, Lori? Can you hear us, iPhone? I'm not sure. Hello, are you logged in? Can you
Hi.
hear?
Yeah, it's Lori. Sorry,
Okay.
I missed the time. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. I'm sorry. Yeah, I mean, it's being recorded, so, but welcome. Glad you're here. Yeah.
Okay.
So, and this is a deep lecture, kind of like a new perspective that we've been kind of stumbling around and just wrestling with and trying to put words around and stuff. But it's talking about the universal life force and its connection to the ego, and how like the separated, limited ego, is afraid of, but longs for this connection with this larger, higher self, universal life force, and the greater consciousness, and it's sort of like about learning how to relax and be spontaneous with it, to allow it to flow through, and how sort of the ego is more, trying to control its image and control, different, feelings, and doesn't have this sense of its okayness, which once we are more identified with our universal life force, oops, we must have lost Lori again. um, that when we're more identified there. Hey, I guess we lost you and you came back in. There you are. Okay, can you hear us now? So anyway, to go on, so to those who have begun to experience the immediacy of this greater life in a renewal of energy, find that paradoxically, the more they give of their energy, the more renewed energy they generate within. For that is the law of the universal life principle. The separated state operates dualistically. It seems logical that the more one gives, the less one has, and the more depleted one becomes. This comes from the illusion that the outer ego is all there is to individuality. The root of the fear to let go of all tight ego defenses is precisely this misconception. Those who begin to experience these powers and energies also begin to notice the influx of an inspirational intelligence that seems to be much vaster than anything they know in their outer intellect, as opposed to inner wisdom. Yet it is essentially their best self. It first seems to be a foreign power, but it is not. It only seems so when these channels have become clogged due to one's ignorance. This vaster intelligence manifests as inspiration, guidance, and a new form of intuition that comes not in a vague feeling, but in concise words and definite knowledge, graspable and translatable into daily living. The discovery of this new life reconciles the apparent opposites of being an individual and being at one with all others, an integral part of the whole. There are no longer reconcilable opposites, but interdependent facts. All such opposites, all apparently mutually exclusive alternatives that cause so much heartache to humanity, begin to fall into place when the ego connects with universal life. So, it's like it starts out with, this whole, life force energy. And so it is really what we are. And if we tune in, if we close our eyes and just breathe and feel our energy, the energy that is the signature of our aliveness right in this moment now, in this present, in this sensory, and in that, energy that we're feeling is also the conscious awareness, of our surroundings, of our inner life, of our, outer worlds. So it's all, this space that's really bigger than just this kind of sense of, the me, the little me, the good me, the bad me, the right me, the wrong me, and the one that, is, struggling to find, happiness. And so part of what the guide is saying is that, in the happiness is going to come from, remaking this connection. And it's a part of the journey of individuation of the self that we lose this connection and kind of flounder in this space of pain and separation for a while. But it's like we're only a motion away. We are never really disconnected. It's only the sense that we don't realize and can't recognize the connection that exists. And so, and then we also have fear, because the ego, feels like to let go is to let go of necessary control, of necessary safety, of necessary, having what it wants. And so now we're going into the section on how to let go of the ego. When I speak of letting go of the ego, I do not mean its annihilation or even disregarding its importance. The ego has made itself a separated part of the universal life that can be found deep within the self. It is immediately accessible, if so desired, when the ego is ready to reconnect itself to its original source. When the ego becomes strong enough to take the risk to trust faculties other than its limited conscious capabilities, its, inner beliefs, its inner story constructs, like it will find a previously undreamed of new security. But before it can take this new step, the ego fears that it will be crushed, fall into nothingness, and cease to exist. Holding on to unmoving, petrified psychic substances seems to alleviate this fear. So, it's like to change, to let go somehow to our default mode network, to our construct of how the world is, to our experience, that has been, like the story that we've constructed out of like our experiences, feels like, it's safer that way. We're holding on to sort of our labels, to our understanding, to sort of the way that we've interpreted it. And he's calling this an unmoving, petrified psychic substance. And it does have sort of a temporary sense of alleviating the fear. The unmoving seems safe, and the moving perilous. To want to hold on makes life scary, for life is eternally moving. When you find that the movement is safe because it carries you, you have found the only real security there is. All other security, trust in or leaning on the static, is illusory and breeds forever more fear. So, oftentimes we can see in our life maybe where we might be doing that, like sort of trying to find security in the old story, in the, way that we believe it is, and kind of not opening up and letting go into unknown and ultimate, potentiality or possibility that is beyond our own little ego story, but is not beyond our greater self, our own universal life force. So, analogy with the law of gravity. The principle is the same as the one that moves the planets, which do not fall into space. At the core of the human predicament, there always lies the feeling, if I do not hold on to myself, I endanger myself. Once you are conscious of this feeling, you possess an important key, for you can consider the possibility that this is an error. There is nothing to fear. You cannot be crushed or annihilated. You can only be carried as the planets are carried in space. As I so often say, the state of humanity's present consciousness creates the world you live in, including its physical laws. You are so used to putting effect first and cause later, because in your dualistic state of mind, you are unable to see the whole picture and to tend to think in an either-or manner. The truth is you are not relegated to this sphere. Rather, this sphere, with all it contains, is an expression of humanity's overall state of consciousness. So we can, maybe see this in the, collective, larger, reality, like, like even the laws of gravity or whatever. But we might also look at this, in, sort of our worldviews, our smaller, more personal worldviews about life. And basically what he's saying here is that it's like we tend to think that life is shaping our worldview through our experience, but he's really saying, no, our worldview is pre-existent at some level in our psyche, in our soul, and it is shaping our world. And when we can begin to, apply conscious awareness in that way, we can sort of do some work that can change the way that life keeps showing up for us. So, one of the physical, so gravity, one of the physical laws expressing this state of consciousness is the law of gravity. It is a special law that pertains only to your dualistic consciousness. The law of gravity parallels or expresses on the physical level the emotional reaction to and the apprehension of falling and crushing when the ego is given up as the sole form of individual existence. Spheres of consciousness that have transcended the dualism of this plane have different physical laws corresponding to their overall consciousness. The science of space proves this because in outer space there is no gravity. Your Earth is not the last and only reality. This analogy is more than merely symbolic. It is a sign that could widen your horizon in thinking about and inwardly experiencing new boundaries of reality, thus diminishing your fear and your illusory, isolated ego existence. How to apply this, my friends, to where you most most of you are in your search for your real self. Look at the various layers of your consciousness. The more you succeed in making previously unconscious material conscious, and consequently reorienting the faulty reflexes of previously unconscious material, the closer you come to the reality of the universal life principle within you. The universal life principle then becomes freer to disclose itself, and you become freer from fears, shames, and prejudices until you can open yourself up to its availability. Anyone can corroborate that as more courage is summoned to look at the naked truth of oneself, it becomes easier to connect with a vaster, safer, more blissful life within. The more connected you become with something that removes all uncertainty and all conflict, the more you will feel a security and ability to function that you never knew could exist within you. Here are functions of power, of energy, functions of intelligence that resolve all conflict and furnish solutions to apparently unsolvable problems. All ifs and buts in daily practical living are loosened up, not through outer magical means, but through your increasing capacity to cope with everything that happens as an integral part of yourself. Moreover, you develop an increased ability to experience pleasure as you are meant to. To the extent you have disconnected yourself from universal life, you must yearn for this way of living. During our discussions, we have come face to face with many aspects of this triad. I have spoken before of a frequent phenomenon, namely that people are often ashamed of their higher selves, of the best in them. This shame of your higher self is a very important feeling connected with the fear of exposing the real self. A specific personality type feels this shame primarily about good qualities, about giving and loving. Such people resist giving into society's demands, believing thereby they would lose the integrity of their individuality. They fear their submission to and dependency on the opinions of others, and therefore feel ashamed of any genuine impulse to please others. Sometimes we have the mass that wants to please and, get something in return, but we also have our genuine higher self, desire to connect and to be in connection with each other. And so the more they feel more themselves when they are separate, hostile, aggressive, cruel. The human reaction to the real self is shame and falsification. There's a very deep vulnerability in exposing our real self, right? And so this is where a lot of this comes from. So all human beings, and especially then if we have judgment, but even without judgment, it's like we have to be able to tolerate, like here I am, the good, the bad, and the ugly, the beauty and the, the confusion and the lostness, the, darkness and the light, right? And I have to be able to kind of, like be okay, have the humility, right? That can say, I don't need to be better than that. God doesn't, hate me or judge me because I'm, in this, half perfected state. We're all in a half perfected state. It doesn't mean that there's something wrong with us. It just means that we're here to do more perfecting. And we can't do that, with judgment. We can only do that with love. So all human beings have a similar reaction to their real self. This does not apply only to their actual goodness and loving generosity, but also to all other real feeling and ways of being. This strange shame manifests as embarrassment and a sense of exposure about the way one really is. It makes one feel as though one were naked and exposed. This is not the shame of one's deceits and destructiveness, nor of one's compliance. This shame is an entirely different level and of a different quality. Whatever one really is feels shamefully naked, regardless of good or bad thoughts, feelings, or behavior. So can you say, like just to be our real self, it's like a nakedness, and that naturally feels exposed, right? And so see if you can, connect with this inside and see the difference between sort of the other kind of shame of one's deceits and destructiveness. And again, we can have, shame of our deceits and destructiveness that are our ISI, like judging us and blaming us and telling us, we're bad. And we can have, just a natural conscience, like that flags us when we're aware that we're, sort of hiding something or not, having some level of destructiveness in our being. So this shame is, because of this feeling, the shame is felt most acutely when it comes to being what one is in the moment. So like if there's this one sharing that we used to do in TP groups sometimes, is that, like if you really knew me, what you would know is. And so like kind of the invitation is to reveal something of this real self that feels, kind of out there, and to see, what happens, because we're afraid of that exposure. But actually that kind of thing is also intimacy and what we long for, and to be known and to be seen. And so like if we can see ourselves, and, like whose eyes are we looking through, that, like, can we see ourselves through God's love in our real self, and it may be even our imperfect real self, but, somehow even our negativity. But if we can see ourselves truly, we're just works in progress, we're in a learning curve, and we're not meant to be perfect. We're meant to be exploring and experiencing and learning and growing from them. Because of this feeling, people pretend. This is a different kind of pretense than the one that covers up lack of integrity, destructiveness, and cruelty. This different kind of pretense is deeper, more subtle. You may pretend things you actually feel, because it's like too real to be, sharing the real thing. You may really feel love, but to show this real love feels naked. So you create a false love. You may really feel anger, but to feel anger feels naked. So you create a false anger. You may really feel sadness, but you feel mortified to acknowledge the sadness even to yourself. So you create false sadness, which you can easily display to others. You may really experience pleasure, but this too is humiliating to expose. So you create false pleasure. This even applies to elements like confusion and puzzlement. The real feeling seems naked and exposed, so you create a false one. This falsification appears like a protective garment that no one but one's deepest, usually unconscious self knows of. This protective garment anesthetizes one to the vibrancy and buoyancy of life. So this is a kind of a barrier between us and this, universal life force, because we kind of can't face or feel our true self, our vulnerable real self. And all such imitations build a screen between you and your life center. This too separates you from reality, for it is the reality of your own being that you cannot stand and feel compelled to imitate, thereby counterfeiting your very existence. The moving stream of life seems dangerous, not only as far as your safety is concerned, but also as it affects your pride and dignity. But all this is stark and tragic illusion, as you can only find true safety when you unite with the source of all life within you. So you can find true dignity only when you overcome the shame of being real, whatever this may mean at the moment. So, I think I like this term dignity, right? And sort of if we can sense into that, like how can we find dignity in our real self? What is it that, gives us this foundation of acceptableness, of true goodness, even though we're imperfect, even though, and so we can, like not be ashamed when we discover our faults or our flaws. We can kind of meet them with a willingness and a dignity that honors and recognizes it's not all of who we are. We have, our divine nature, and we have many divine qualities that are well developed in us. And yeah, we're not perfect. We can't, we have to have dignity and humility rather than pride and shame. Sometimes annihilation seems a lesser evil than the strange sense of shame and the exposure of one's real being. When you recognize the shame and do not push it away as inconsequential, you make a tremendous step, my friends. Feeling the shame is the key to finding a numbness that causes despair and frustration because it leads to self-alienation and disconnectedness of a particular kind. This feeling is not translatable into rational language because only the flavor of the experience and its quality distinguishes the real from the false. The imitation feelings are often subtle and so deeply ingrained that they have become second nature. Therefore, it takes a deeply sensitive letting go, letting yourself be, and letting yourself feel, as well as wanting to be discerning about your discoveries. All this is necessary before you become acutely aware of the apparent sense of exposure and nakedness the real feelings cause in you. The subtle imitation not only reproduces other or opposite feelings from those you register, but also, and just as frequently, the identical ones. The next step is then the intensification, which serves as a measure to make the false appear real. So I'm not sure I fully understand, like those sentences I just read. Somehow it feels like, he's saying here that, this discernment requires sort of this awareness of the subtle sense of exposure and nakedness that our real feelings cause in us. So does anybody want to give a stab at how they experience that, or what, an example of what that might be in your life experience, your own experience? That's a tough one.
Could it be like the opposite ones, like when you think that people don't like what simply, like maybe you feel like you're not understood, but maybe like there's actually a false one that's similar that you don't really want, or the one like responsibility, like somebody might want a lot of respect and they don't understand why they're not getting it, but the real thing is they don't really want the responsibility. So they, like, it says it's like an opposite feeling from what you really
Right.
feel. So you're actually trying to avoid responsibility, but you
Right. And maybe that responsibility would come with, like somehow, I mean, you could be in a kind of authoritarian place of responsibility and a kind of mask of responsibility, or you could be with that vulnerability that you're feeling about the responsibility and share that, right? Or acknowledge that, and be vulnerable with others in that part of yourself, and there you might feel it a bit. So that's like both, I think, like they're two different principles, but I think both are definitely active and can be a part of it. So anybody else?
So being with the numbness, being with the shame, um, unravels all of the everything that's behind it, right?
Yeah, I think, it's like shame is a really hard feeling for us to feel, especially when, we experience it, as the uh, target of being shamed, right? Which is usually what we're feeling. And so like it really can help if we can kind of crack that. It's like there's this almost automatic, the shaming behavior brings up the shame, and we're kind of like automatically in this reaction and loop, and then we're fighting against the feeling, and running from the feeling because it's very difficult, especially because it sort of announces that something is wrong with us, right? And so we're feeling like we have to hide that, or we have to deny that, or we have to fix that, or we have to, that's not allowed to be. And in that kind of place, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of contraction. We can't be our natural real self, we can't be spontaneous, we can't you know uh, just expose, like, okay, take me or leave me, here I am. you know um and know that we're good enough, we're doing the best we know how, and some people may love us and take us, and some people may not, but we can sort of like, when we feel the shame, examine like, well, what is that feeling, and where is it coming from, and to sort of, it says, necessary before you become acutely aware of the apparent sense of exposure and nakedness, right? So like to feel that feeling, the strange sense of shame that's there. And so like what I like to do with that is to sort of, instead of calling it shame, is to kind of break it down into like, well, what does shame feel like? What's the sensation in my body when I'm feeling shame? And that can be difficult as well, because it's not a fun feeling, but I think when we can kind of just like breathe it, and okay, this is just a sensation, and it's not, doesn't mean anything, it means that somehow I've fallen into a current of shame energy, it's not about me, it's just a universal current of shame energy that I'm all of a sudden affected by. And so I'm just here feeling what shame feels like. And I'm not taking it personally, but I'm being curious about, how does, shame feel, and what is shame's message, and, what is the message, that I received inside of me from being shamed, that kind of thing.
Because shame is on that energetical level is very much like under even anger and sadness, right? Is it
I mean,
not?
everybody kind of, I think, is unique, but yeah, I mean, you could, some programming says, you're not allowed to have anger or sadness, so therefore, if you go there, you're something's wrong with you, you should be ashamed of yourself, it's not allowed. I don't know that everybody feels that way. I mean, I think sometimes, when we're in conflict, where there's always a sadness or, a regret. But regret feels a little different to me than shame. Maybe an awareness of, oh, I just got triggered and I went into a place, and, so I can regret and try to make a better choice next time. But that feels a lot different than shame.
I think we feel, maybe not consciously, but unconsciously, we feel we're doing the best we can when we're avoiding all of that, all of those feelings of shame and anger. So it's a double-edged sword. It's like, you say a lot, you always saying, well, we're just doing the best we can. But in reality, we're not doing the best we can because we're not feeling what we need to feel.
Okay. And yet, like that awareness could be couched, not sort of like, oh, you're not doing the best you can, but you are doing the best you can, and there's another step to take.
That's okay, but what about people who hurt other people because they're not doing the best they can?
I think everybody's doing the best they can, even when they're hurting other people. I don't think, like, this is again, like, if you look in your own life, when you've hurt people, if you go back to the time when you made the decision that caused the problem or whatever, like, you might be aware that, there might have been, different choices, in hindsight, there's Monday morning quarterbacking. You can see other things that you didn't see at the time. But if you take yourself back to the time that you made the choice and you did the deed, then it's like in that moment you were following sort of the movement of the universal life force in you, even if it was somewhat, constrained or, like colored by defense and image and trauma and negative belief.
Maybe so, but I would also say that I just didn't understand what the hell I was doing.
Right.
And so I hurt somebody.
Yeah. And so that's what unconsciousness does.
I didn't really realize that I hurt somebody until in hindsight, understood what I did.
Right. And then when you discover that, you can defend yourself, and deny that you did that, or you can, accept that, you were in a learning curve and you were unconscious and you didn't realize it, but now you see it and you want to not make those mistakes again.
Yeah, or I could apologize.
Yeah, of
What I
course.
did.
Of course. I mean, it's so, but you don't have to make yourself, you don't have to make yourself somehow, like you should have been better. That voice is the ISI, and it is Satan. It is Luciferic consciousness. It is the voice that wants to control you, allegedly to make you God, but really to try to, keep you in pain and suffering. So, I mean, it's subtle differences because yes, we don't want to just, deny self-responsibility, deny, maybe where we made mistakes, where we were unconscious, where we had impact that wasn't intentional. And we want to, like, if if we judge ourselves and make ourselves wrong for it, then I don't think we accept responsibility for it. That's the opposite of accepting responsibility for it. Judging ourselves and making ourselves wrong for it is a way of putting our spirit, our soul down, right? And kind of sending it into hell realms. And it's not, there's no reason for that. We don't need guilt. We just need remorse. We just need awareness. We just need, and, that's those of us who have love and are naturally loving. I mean, yes, there are people on this planet that, are, doing harm, but even them, I think, it comes from, ignorance and unconsciousness and false gods that they're chasing after. And if they really knew what they were doing, it's like Jesus said, forgive them, Father, they know not what they do.
Mhm. Mhm.
But yeah, it's where I think, we have to like learn the difference between, like, I remember one time going to LifeSpring and they said, okay, so, self-responsibility is like an important word now in this new age kind of thing. And the guide uses it all the time too. But our ego mind interprets that word to mean control and blame. If we're responsible, we should have controlled it. And if we're responsible, we're to blame for it. And that is not at all what spiritual self-responsibility means. We, the shadow like is not going to be controlled except through acceptance and love and awareness, right? And choice, free choice. And so, we're all here learning what we didn't know yet and trying to, learn, make better decisions and not, and we can feel sorry for having affected people and, we can certainly apologize and, make amends to whatever degree that we can. But I don't think we have to feel bad about ourselves because, this is where we're learning from our experience. And
On some level, it's all personal, right? It's sort of, yeah, it and taking offense as well is, I mean, yeah, this is a bad deed if people, did something really bad. It has to do with them more than anything, right? So it's I see how that's not gonna, the guilt is not gonna really help probably in this case, because it's like you guilty, it sort of maybe even takes away that responsibility because you're responsible for something like in front of this person, in front of this humanity that holds you responsible for all of it, but not like something higher. Oh, I don't know, I'm just playing with it.
Yeah, and I mean it's a tough one. I mean, if we think of the world stage and like the whole assignment of responsibility for all of the atrocities that have been ongoing for a while and now are continuing, right? It's like, but I mean, I can see very clearly, like, this is not going to end, and it's created by population pressures and diminished resources and people. It's Abraham's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And it may be, being now activated through, the power centers and the, attempts to reset the boundaries of the territories and, all of that. And, kind of in the name of self-protection and self-preservation, right? And again, it's not cooperation. It's not recognizing that in the beginning of this lecture, the guide is saying, it's a universal life force. It's in all things, everything, all of us. And when we can kind of understand this unitive reality that we're in, and again, this larger universal, intelligence that is the consciousness and, wisdom in this greater, life force that we're all partaking and one with, right? Then we have some different answers. When we're identified with our little separated ego, now we're in this, tug of war. And I think as long, the ego, it's kind of like an animal. It's going to survive. It's going to fight or it's going to run. It's going to find a way to, think of itself first and try to survive. And so this, I think, is playing out in lots of terrible ways. But I don't know, again, like, and you can hold people responsible, you can have courts and you can, talk about genocide and all of those things. I mean, I think it's important to talk about, matricide of the Earth Mother. And so there's a thing about taking responsibility in the sense of waking up, becoming conscious, choosing again, making discernment, seeing it more clearly. And we just have to kind of keep speaking truth, putting it out there until people are mature enough to make a different choice. But we all have free will. That's our God-given right. And if I know for myself, if I try to force myself to do the right thing before I am choosing that from deep within my inner, conscious being, it doesn't do any good. It's like, that's, I should be some way, but I don't want to be that way. I'm not ready to be that way yet or whatever. So, like, get off my back, shoulds, like, when I can find the truth about, how being the way I am doesn't serve me, or being the way I should be really will serve me, and I can make a conscious choice. Oh yeah, I could do that. I want that instead. Then I'm ready to move. But until then, if I'm just trying to push myself into some mental idea of how I think, I should be, then I'm fighting against my own natural developmental journey and trying to push the river, trying to, I have to arrive at it through my own free will choice. And the voice inside that says you should is coercive. It's not a free will choice. Does that make sense? So we have to just kind of relax a little out of the shoulds. Not that we're going to give up improvement or we're going to give up self-responsibility or, wanting something more, but I don't think we arrive at it through the shoulds. So let's see, where were we? So it takes a deeply sensitive letting go, letting ourselves be, letting yourself feel, as well as wanting to be discerning about your discoveries. All this is necessary before you become acutely aware of the apparent sense of exposure and nakedness the real feelings cause in you. The subtle imitation not only reproduces other or opposite feelings from those you register, but also just as frequently the identical ones. So this may be what you were referring to, Lori. The next step is then the intensification, which serves as a measure to make the thoughts appear real. Right? And so I'm not sure, like, so this intensification, maybe it's when the voices get really loud in our heads, or, we're really unhappy with ourselves and, going to this sort of, place of punishment, of self-punishment. But I'm not sure if that's what he's referring there. When you do meet the momentary real self, it is far from perfect. This is not a dramatic experience, yet it is crucial. For what you are now contains all the seeds you will ever need in order to live deeply and vibrantly. So if you can imagine right now, just like, okay, in your real self, in the true nature of your being. Even though you're imperfect, you contain now all the seeds you will ever need in order to live deeply and vibrantly. You are already this universal life power. When you have the courage to be your real self, a new approach to your own inner life can begin, after which all pretenses fall by the wayside. So, biblical symbolism of nakedness. The shame of one's own nakedness in showing oneself as it is in the now is explained by the deep symbolism of the story of Adam and Eve. The nakedness of reality is paradise. For when that nakedness is no longer denied, a new blissful experience can begin right here and now, not in another life in the beyond. But it takes some acclimatizing after one has become aware of the shame and of the ingrained subtle habits with which one covers up one's inner nakedness. Once you learn to uncover yourself, you will finally step out of your protective shell and become more real. And I think, again, we can't uncover ourselves and find this realness if we are judging ourselves, if we are shaming our own nakedness, if we are doing this to ourselves, right? There's no way. And that's part of what that ISI tends to do is write our case. You will be the naked you as you are now, not better than you are, not worse than you are, and also not different from the way you are. You will stop the imitation, the counterfeit feelings, and the ways of being, and venture out into the world the way you happen to be. Are there any questions in connection with this lecture? Question: how can you determine whether your feelings are real or put on? The only one who can determine it is you, by seriously probing and first of all considering the possibility that your feelings may be put on, and by not being frightened of this. For people are terrified of the thought that their feelings are fake, even in a subtle way. They fear that if these feelings are not real, then they have no feelings. They fear their own emptiness, and their fear is devastating. It exerts a subtle pressure to go on pretending. But there's always a point inside where you say, no, I do not want to feel. Whether this stems from childhood and personal traumatic experiences or connects with a deeper human problem applying to all individuals that I discussed in this lecture, there must always be a wish not to feel. This wish is often totally unconscious, so that one is disconnected from it and helpless about the result, which is, of course, no feelings. The terror is infinitely greater when the conscious self that wants feelings is ignorant of the side of the self that fears feelings. The terror of being unable to feel cannot be compared to any other. It is therefore of enormous help to realize that no one is really without feelings, and these feelings cannot ever die permanently. Life and feelings are one. Where there is one, there must be the other, even if one is inactivated at the moment. Knowing this makes it possible to search within and ask, where have I decided not to feel? The moment you become acutely aware of your fear to feel, you will cease to fear that you have no feelings. It is then possible to reactivate your feelings with the help of reason through realistic and rational evaluation of the circumstances. I have given you a lot to think about. This is quite a bit of material which you can fruitfully use in the continuation of your pathwork. Be blessed, every one of you. May your endeavors succeed to become real, to find the courage to be really naked without any false covers. You cannot help but succeed if you really want to. Those who do not move and grow and liberate themselves do not want to. And it is important to know this and find in you the inner voice that refuses to move. May all of your false layers fall away, because this is what you really want and decide. You will then discover the glory of living. Be in peace and be in God. So I don't know, this is, a complex lecture. And a lot of times, the lectures that I've really integrated. It's like every sentence makes sense and resonates, and I can really see it. And this is one of them that, like, I'm, like, what exactly is the guide pointing to here? I'm not always sure. So you might, just kind of open to your own inner exploration here too, and, notice, how does this land? I mean, he's talking about a very specific kind of, dynamic, that I sort of get, but I don't find its direct application exactly. So, and I do get this idea of sort of this fear of exposure, this fear of being spontaneous, of just allowing myself to be real in the moment without always controlling and couching, and you know and some of that, of course, requires the transformation of some of the lower self. Like, if I am real and spontaneous in the moment, and what comes out is negative stuff, or judgmental, or angry, or blamey, or something like that, it's not the end of the world, but that's not the ultimate goal. And so the purification of that, like, oh, that showed up, like, maybe better I don't act it out, but I need to know it's there. So, like, we keep getting provoked in different ways by the universe to keep seeing what's still lodged inside of us, and not to run away or be ashamed of it, but to meet it, and to try to help it, right? Because that's, like, our higher self, and our conscious ego, like, is working with this, and it's part of the beauty of who we are and what we're doing. It's not a measure of our badness or our ugliness or our shame. It's really a measure of our greatness, our willingness to come here and face ourselves in this, realm of projection of all our dualities and all of our feelings and all of our struggles. So let me shift out of our share here. So, any final thoughts or sharing here? I think the main thing for this lecture is to kind of just work with the fact that, there is this self that you are, that is, like, way more than sort of your separated ego story and self. And I think, if you might want to go back and read the first part of this lecture, because I think it kind of highlights this beautiful sort of reality that is just, we're separated from it. The guide says, like, we're in a process of individuation. And so in that process, we kind of lose touch with this greater reality that we are of, and are working on sort of our own unique individual and tiny separated selves. But it's never really gone. We're always much more. And when we can learn to connect with and harness that, and know that that's within us, and that we're not devoid of resources, and that we don't, even though the ego mind might not know the answers, the answers are coming to us. They're coming from our desire, from our longing, from our prayer, from our thing. And if they're not arriving in a way that seems clear or in time, then we need to look at what is the resistance, where we are saying, like, we have this longing, but we also have a fear, and so we're not at choice, because we can't fully choose our yes current, because there's an inner no current that's still holding on to the resistance and the fear. And what this lecture says is that fear is kind of essentially of an annihilation, of a ego death, of a loss of our story and our whole sense of our identification, with that story and ourself. And to some degree, that's true, but it feels less dangerous and threatening if we can actually begin to connect with this sense of our universal, the life force inside of us, the source of our energy, the source. And even when, like the mind thinks, oh, I have to do yet another task in service of somebody and I don't really feel like it, like in that awareness, it's like that's a good moment to say, okay, I don't want to do this. I can't do this by myself. God, do it through me. You know, it's not for me to do, and to sacrifice through, but it's for me to, if it's really for me to do, if it's a true choice, that says, okay, not like I should, but, like I want to, and maybe I want to because if I don't, the consequences will be worse. So, it might feel a little bit coerced, but it's still, our choice, our free will choice. And when we can make that, um, I think then things can move, and then where they're not moving, we can look at where is that inner conflict, where is the fear of letting go, and or the fear of asking for the help we need, or the fear that we won't get the help that we're asking that we need, or where is the block. So okay.
Yeah, can I just say something?
Yeah.
So it's really weird that I'm sorry that I'm late, and that it was weird because my son is visiting, my adult, 24-year-old son is visiting, and we never speak ever. And then he started to speak, and it was at the time during this meeting. And the funny thing was, he was saying things that were so challenging to the ego, and saying, trying to share. And I could see a part of me was like, you know, you can be defensive, or you could just let him speak his piece. Like, that's the most loving thing you could do. But at the same part, I had those same words. Like, this lecture was literally, even though I didn't know it was this lecture, the parts of this lecture, the duality was right there while he was talking to me. And like a perfect example was how he was saying, because he's at that age where he could study psychology and everything's on YouTube, and saying how, well, you didn't finish your generational clearing, crap before I was growing up. And so now I have to take on, I'm sitting there going, like, oh yeah.
Violin.
And then I kept saying, like, okay, like I kept trying to go, feel the feeling while he is the mirror. Like, in another reality, this wouldn't bother me if I weren't sitting here judging myself, while at the same time I was judging him, going like, you pompous little punk. Like, it was
Yeah.
all at the same time. You're such a good kid, and here I was like, yeah, like this.
So, and he's just young and he's full of himself, at some level, it's like, and that's a part of a stage of life that I think we sort of have to pass through, it's like, it doesn't mean, I think that he's, somehow morally terrible or something, but,
Right.
yeah, immature, it's all, we're just immature when we're,
It's so hard to be loving when you're being defensive, it's like, but grateful for this work because of them.
yeah. And it sounds like that's beautiful that you even, even if you didn't succeed completely, that you were conscious and holding that space and trying to sort of breathe into it and give a little space, for him, even though, like his perspective is not ultimate, final, total truth and reality either, right? It's like it's coming from his journey and his working through, and so it sounds beautiful.
Yeah, and the part where you kept saying, like, the letting go, like, even, and thank you for the words of wisdom, because that actually helps. And at the same point, I could see the thing that really bothered me wasn't the negative judgments of everything that I did. He was being polite, like, I forgive you for not being the perfect mom. It was more the fear of the future of, what if he never grows out of it? What if he, is like, oh my God, like, stop. How I feel about him right now is what's most important. And like you said, it was like, you know what, he's young and he'll wake up one day and I don't want him to like look back, just whatever, you know, and it was kind of like what we were saying before, what you were saying before, everyone, he really is doing the best he can
Yeah.
in that moment, even though the best he can is irritating my ego.
Yeah, good. Yeah. And then we can, kind of like from that more objective perspective, we can kind of honor our being irritated without like needing to, like attack and reject him, right? So beautiful. That's an integration. That's a, way of bringing the splits together. Okay.
Thank you, Darlene.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank
Take
you
care.
very much. It was good to seeing everyone.
You too.
It was great
Bye.
seeing you guys. Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.